I'm not even sure where to start. This happened a few months ago, and I still can't wrap my head around it. It feels surreal, like something out of a bad movie, but it's my life now. My best friend, or at least, the person I thought was my best friend, turned out to be someone completely different. Someone dangerous. Her name was Lena. We met during our first year of college and hit it off right away. She was smart, funny, and had this magnetic energy that made everyone want to be around her. We did everything together, study sessions, late-night food runs, even family holidays. She was practically my sister. That's why our argument felt so stupid at the time. It wasn't even a big deal, just a misunderstanding about a group project. But after that fight, she stopped returning my texts. A few days later, I found out she'd packed up and left town without telling anyone. At first, I was confused, then hurt, but I figured she just needed space. I never imagined there was something more to it. For weeks, I tried to get in touch with her. I called, texted, even messaged her on social media. Nothing. It was like she'd vanished. Our mutual friends were just as confused as I was. Some of them said they'd seen her acting a little off before she left, more secretive, checking her phone constantly, and avoiding certain questions. But no one could figure out why she'd cut ties so abruptly. I told myself she'd come back eventually, that we'd talk it out and laugh about how dramatic the whole thing had been. Months went by, and I started to move on. Life got busy, and the weirdness of her disappearance became just another unanswered question. Then, one evening, I was scrolling through my phone when a news article caught my eye. It wasn't the headline that grabbed me, but the photo. It was Lena. Her face stared back at me, grainy but unmistakable. My stomach dropped as I read the headline, "Local woman wanted in connection to multi-state crime spree." At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. But the more I read, the more my world started to crumble. Fraud, burglary, even accusations of violent crimes. The details were hazy, but the article mentioned she'd been on the run for months, using fake identities to avoid capture. The timeline lined up perfectly with the day she left town. I sat there, staring at my phone, trying to process what I was reading. The Lena I knew couldn't possibly be the same person in that article. She wasn't a criminal, she was my best friend, the person who helped me study for finals, who laughed with me over bad cafeteria food, who cried on my shoulder after her last breakup. None of it made sense. I started digging for more information, searching her name online, and the deeper I went, the worse it got. Police reports, surveillance footage, witness statements, it was all there. The authorities believed she'd been part of a string of scams, targeting people she'd befriended and stealing from them before disappearing. And then I found something that made my blood run cold. A photo taken from a security camera in another state, dated just a few days after she'd left town. She was sitting across from a man in a diner, laughing like nothing was wrong. That man. He was later found unconscious in his apartment, all his valuables gone. The implication hit me like a ton of bricks. Lena didn't just disappear because of our argument. She left because she was running. And I couldn't stop wondering, had she been planning to use me, too? Was I supposed to be her next target? I couldn't stop replaying every moment we'd spent together, looking for signs I'd missed. Had Lena ever hinted at this side of herself? Were there red flags I'd ignored? The memories were a blur of laughter and shared secrets, but now, they felt tainted. I thought back to the little things, how she was always vague about her family, how she sometimes had more cash on hand than made sense for a college student, or how she'd brush off questions about her sudden absences. At the time, I thought she just valued her privacy. Now, it all felt calculated, like she'd been weaving a web of lies the entire time. The scariest part was realizing how easily she'd fooled me. If she was capable of conning strangers, what had stopped her from doing the same to me? I started to question everything, every joke, every compliment, every late-night conversation. Had any of it been real? I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd dodged a bullet, that our argument might have saved me from whatever plan she'd had in mind. But even that thought brought no comfort. It only made me wonder how close I'd come to being another name on her list. As the weeks went on, I couldn't shake the paranoia that crept into every corner of my life. I started double-checking my locks, looking over my shoulder when I walked home from class, and avoiding any mutual acquaintances who might still be in touch with her. I knew it was irrational. Lena was probably hundreds of miles away, too busy running to care about me. But the betrayal cut so deep that trust felt impossible. If my best friend could hide something so dark, who else around me could be lying? The last straw came when I received a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name scrawled on the front in handwriting I recognized immediately. I hesitated before opening it, my hands trembling. Inside was a single piece of paper with one line, "You were always different." No explanation, no apology, just those 4 words. My heart sank as a wave of fear and anger hit me all at once. Was it a warning? A goodbye? Or some twisted way of keeping me on edge? I'll never know for sure. I haven't heard from Lena since, but her shadow lingers in my life. I don't know if she's been caught, if she's still out there conning and hurting people, or if she's even alive. What I do know is that I'll never look at another friendship the same way again. Because sometimes, the people closest to us are the ones who leave the deepest scars. I'm not sure why I'm writing this. Maybe I just need to get it off my chest, or maybe I'm hoping someone else has experienced something similar. Either way, it's been eating at me, and I can't ignore it anymore. This happened about 2 weeks ago, but I still can't shake the feeling that it's not over. It was late, probably close to midnight, and I was waiting at the bus stop near my apartment. The area's pretty quiet, and at that hour, it feels like a ghost town. I'd missed the earlier bus and was stuck waiting for the next one, which wasn't due for another 20 minutes. The air was cold, and the streetlights flickered occasionally, casting long, shifting shadows. That's when I noticed him. He was standing a little further down the sidewalk, just outside the circle of light from the street lamp. At first, I didn't think much of it. People come and go, especially around public transportation. But something about the way he stood there, perfectly still, gave me an uneasy feeling. I tried to ignore him, telling myself I was being paranoid. But as the minutes dragged on, he didn't move. He just stood there, barely visible in the shadows. Then, out of nowhere, he started walking toward me. Slowly, deliberately. My pulse quickened, and I instinctively tightened my grip on my bag. When he reached the edge of the light, I finally got a good look at him. He was tall, with hollow cheeks and sunken eyes that seemed too focused, too intense. His clothes were wrinkled and hung loosely on his frame, as if they belonged to someone else. Waiting for the bus, he asked, his voice raspy and low. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He stood there for a moment, staring at me, before leaning in slightly. You shouldn't be here, he said, his tone shifting to something more serious. It's not safe. My mouth went dry. Why? I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a step back and looked around, as if checking for something. Then he said, sometimes danger doesn't look like danger, until it's too late. Before I could respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows as quickly as he'd appeared. I sat there, frozen, replaying his words over and over in my mind. Sometimes danger doesn't look like danger, until it's too late. What the hell was that supposed to mean? Was he talking about the neighborhood? The bus stop? Or was he just some unhinged guy trying to mess with me? The bus arrived a few minutes later, and I got on, still glancing nervously out the window, half expecting to see him lurking in the shadows. But he was gone. When I got home, I tried to shake it off. It was late, I was tired, and maybe I was overthinking things. I double-checked that my doors and windows were locked, something about his warning had gotten under my skin, and went to bed. But I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up to small sounds, a creak from the hallway, the faint hum of something electronic. Normally, I'd brush it off as the usual noises of an old apartment, but that night, every sound felt wrong. Like the house was holding its breath. The next morning, I woke up feeling groggy and unsettled. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head, that the strange man at the bus stop was just some random weirdo, and the noises in my apartment were nothing unusual. But then I noticed something odd. My keys, which I always leave on the small hook by the door, were sitting on the kitchen counter. I didn't remember moving them, but I brushed it off, thinking maybe I'd been scatterbrained the night before. I went about my day as normally as I could, but the unease lingered. That night, things got worse. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I heard it, a faint shuffling sound coming from the living room. My heart stopped. I sat up, straining to listen. It wasn't just the creaks of the building settling or the hum of the fridge, it was deliberate, like someone moving around. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, debating whether to check it out or just lock my bedroom door and wait until morning. But curiosity got the better of me. I slowly crept down the hallway, my pulse hammering in my ears. When I reached the living room, it was empty, or so I thought. I stood there for a moment, scanning the room with my phone's flashlight. Nothing seemed out of place. The furniture was exactly where I'd left it, and the windows were locked. I was about to convince myself I was imagining things when the beam of light caught something that made my stomach drop. The front door chain was unlatched. I distinctly remembered locking it before going to bed, I always did. My hands were shaking as I reached out to secure the chain again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been here. As I backed away from the door, I heard another sound. This time, it was coming from behind me, near the kitchen. It was faint, like the scrape of something being dragged across the countertop. My entire body froze, and for a split second, I considered running straight out the door. But my curiosity, or maybe my fear, kept me rooted in place. I turned slowly, shining my flashlight toward the kitchen, and that's when I saw it, a glass from my cabinet sitting in the middle of the counter. It hadn't been there before. I was sure of it. My pulse raced as I took a step back, unable to look away. That's when I heard a voice, faint, barely audible, but unmistakable. I told you it wasn't safe. I spun around, my flashlight darting across the room, but there was no one there. The voice had been so close, like someone was standing right behind me. My heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. I backed away toward the hallway, every instinct screaming at me to leave, but my feet wouldn't move fast enough. Then, as I reached the entrance to my bedroom, I saw something that stopped me cold. The small window above the sink in the kitchen was open. It had been locked earlier. I was sure of it. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and dialed the police, barely able to explain what was happening through my panicked breaths. They told me to leave the apartment immediately and wait outside for an officer to arrive. I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted out the door, not even bothering to grab my shoes. I stood barefoot on the sidewalk, shaking and clutching my phone, my eyes glued to the front door, half expecting to see someone step out after me. The police arrived within minutes and searched the apartment thoroughly, but they didn't find anyone. They said the window might have been tampered with, but without further evidence, there wasn't much they could do. I stayed with a friend that night, and the next morning, I packed up my things and left. I didn't care about breaking my lease or losing my deposit, I just couldn't stay there. To this day, I don't know who the man at the bus stop was or how he knew what was going to happen. But his words still haunt me, sometimes danger doesn't look like danger, until it's too late. I haven't taken the bus since. I've worked the night shift at a 24-hour grocery store for a couple of years now, and I've seen my fair share of strange things. Drunk customers, people trying to shoplift, even the occasional argument in the parking lot. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened last week. It's been replaying in my head ever since, and I can't seem to let it go. It was around 2 a.m., the time of night when things are usually dead quiet. I was restocking shelves when I noticed a woman and a little boy walk in. At first, I didn't think much of it. We get all kinds of people in the middle of the night. But something about her caught my attention. She was looking over her shoulder constantly, clutching the boy's hand so tightly that he was practically being dragged along. Her hair was messy, her clothes wrinkled, and her face had this look of pure panic. She didn't grab a cart or a basket, just headed straight to the back of the store where the restrooms are. That's when I knew something wasn't right. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should follow her. It wasn't my job to pry into people's business, but the way she kept glancing over her shoulder made my stomach knot. Finally, I decided to check on them. I walked toward the restrooms, trying to look casual, and called out, "Ma'am, is everything okay?" At first, there was no response. Then, from behind the door to the women's restroom, I heard her voice, shaky but firm. "We're fine. Just give us a minute." Something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. Her tone wasn't annoyed or dismissive. It was scared. I lingered near the restrooms, pretending to straighten a nearby shelf, when the automatic doors at the front of the store slid open. A man walked in. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had an air about him that immediately set me on edge. His eyes scanned the store, sharp and calculating, before they landed on me. He approached with long strides and stopped just a few feet away. "Have you seen a woman come in here? Dark hair, about this tall?" He gestured vaguely with his hand. "She's with a kid." My heart was pounding, but I tried to keep my expression neutral. "No, haven't seen anyone like that," I lied, hoping it didn't sound as shaky as I felt. His eyes narrowed, and he studied me for a long moment, like he was trying to decide if I was telling the truth. He nodded once, muttered something under his breath, and started walking through the aisles, his boots echoing on the tile floor. Every instinct in me screamed that this man was dangerous, and I needed to warn the woman. As soon as he disappeared around a corner, I hurried back to the restrooms and tapped lightly on the door. "Ma'am," I whispered, "there's a man here asking about you. Are you in trouble?" The door cracked open just enough for me to see her face. She looked terrified, her eyes darting behind me as if she expected him to appear any second. "Please," she whispered back, barely audible, "don't let him find us." The boy stood beside her, clutching her leg, his wide eyes filled with fear. That was all I needed to hear. I nodded and stepped back. "Stay here. I'll take care of it." I walked back toward the main part of the store, my mind racing. The man was still moving through the aisles, glancing around like he was searching for something, or someone. I needed to keep him away from the restrooms, but I wasn't exactly sure how to do that without drawing suspicion. As I approached him, I called out, "Can I help you find something, sir?" My voice was steady, but inside, I was anything but calm. He stopped and turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "I told you, I'm looking for a woman and a kid," he said flatly, his tone colder now. "Are you sure you haven't seen them?" I shook my head, forcing a shrug. "No one's come through here that fits that description. Maybe they went out the back." I gestured vaguely toward the storage area at the rear of the store, hoping to lead him away from the restrooms. He stared at me for a moment longer, then nodded. "Show me," he said, his voice laced with suspicion. My stomach dropped, but I managed to nod. "Sure, follow me." I led him toward the storage area, praying he wouldn't call my bluff. As we walked, I made sure to keep him in my line of sight. The tension was suffocating, every step feeling like it could be my last chance to act. I led him through the stockroom door, trying to buy as much time as I could. The aisles of shelves were tall and cluttered, the perfect place to get lost, or lose someone. They might have slipped through here, I said, my voice as casual as I could make it. He followed me deeper into the maze of boxes and pallets, his gaze darting around suspiciously. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. When we reached the far corner of the stockroom, I stopped. "This is the back exit," I lied, pointing to a door labeled emergency use only. He hesitated, staring at the door as if weighing his options. "You're sure they didn't just sneak past you?" he asked, his tone sharp. "Pretty sure," I said, taking a step back, closer to the racks of heavy boxes. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing, and for a second, I thought he wasn't buying it. But then, to my relief, he turned and walked toward the door. The moment he reached for the handle, I made my move. Grabbing a nearby pallet jack, I shoved it forward with all my strength, slamming it into the back of his legs. He stumbled forward, hitting the door with a loud crash. Before he could recover, I bolted back toward the store, yelling for the woman and her child. "Go! Now!" I shouted, my voice echoing through the aisles.